Hi, I'm Randy Reid, editor of the Edison Report, and we are here at the Partners Day for the Mount Sinai Light and Health Research Center. I'm joined by Chris Wolgamott of the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for sitting down with me, and tell our audience a little bit about the intersection between utilities and lighting these days.
Well, I think it's becoming a much more interesting intersection. It was all about energy efficiency for a long time, right? How many kWh could we save?
Long.
Yeah, how many?
Too long.
Too long. How many kWh can we save, right? And that was it. And that was the driving force. And I think that it continues to be the driving force for most utility programs. But I think the horizon is out there where we're going to see some changes, where it's going to be less about how much energy you save and use, and more about when that energy is saved and when it's used. So more about KW, less about KWH.
Interesting. So let's speak about that. I've always heard about night demand, and that utilities love night demand. And I remember back when I was a salesman, Chicago would just more or less give away ComEd a dusk to dawn light because they wanted to build that night demand.
Yep.
Do utilities still want to build night demand given the EV situation and we're charging our cars at night?
They still like the night demand because it gives them their even load, right? Their load numbers. However, as we start to increase the amount of renewable energy on the grid, solar, wind, that kind of stuff, and we start removing some of those plants that gave us the constant load, right?
The coal
plants,
gas.
the gas plants, those kind of things. Now that night load becomes different because if you get rid of all those constant loads, the supplies, now that night load's not nearly as giveawayable because they don't have it. There's no solar at night.
Giveawayable, I like that word.
So there's no solar at night, and wind's unpredictable. Usually you get a little more wind at night, but you can't guarantee that you're going to have it. So that night load starts to become a little more, in question as to whether they can just, have it to give away. So I think that, the goal would be to be able to charge your vehicles overnight and use some of that base load to keep the power flowing. But, as we see with California and the famous duck curve and all that kind of stuff, it may not totally be the best place for it. You actually may, it's possible that middle of the day could be the best time to charge your car instead of at night. So,
you mentioned the duck curve. Explain that to our audience.
So the duck curve is when, in California they've got a lot of renewables and they've started removing some of that base load, so they don't have, whether they get rid of nuke plants or they've gotten rid of the coal plants, and so they don't have that load that they can just ramp up and down at will, right? So now this duck curve has a belly and a neck, and it kind of goes like this, and that's when the usage and when the production of electricity is, and so most utilities would really love a nice flat line when it comes to that, when it comes to when they use it and how they use it. So now you're getting this shape of a duck that's causing problems because now you got overload of electricity at one point, but not enough usage, and where you're using it and where you're making it aren't matching up completely. So
there's used to be a huge focus, as you mentioned, on energy savings. Now that LEDs are out there, lighting is less important to utilities. Can we say that?
I think that it's important, but maybe not as big a conservation importance as it used to be.
Okay.
Which I think is different, right? I think lighting's still there, but I think it's in a different way now. I think that utilities are trying to figure out that low-hanging fruit of being able to go from an incandescent that's 65 watts to a 9-watt LED isn't really there anymore, right? And now you're sitting with an LED in place.
Right.
And going to that, those first LEDs are coming up on the time when people are trying to replace them with a better quality, but the savings numbers aren't there. We don't really have something magical like LED on the horizon that we know of that's going to save, but even if we did, we're getting to that diminishing return point where, the wattage is so low on the lights as is.
Right.
We cut it in half again, it's not a lot there, right? I mean, we're down to the bone on the lighting itself. However,
Okay.
lighting controls help with that, but it's also where utilities are looking for lighting to help them is controlling the building, right? I think that's where things are going, is whole building is where we're gonna have to go for conservation. We're no longer at that thing, that low hanging fruit. We're in the middle and upper fruits, and that's a little more expensive, but lighting can help us get to some of those. That can be our step ladder into the middle of those trees and getting some of that other
Okay,
stuff.
when you're talking about that whole building, but they've been saving energy on HVAC, right? They've been doing that for years.
They have, but it's mostly about the efficiency of the unit, right? It's a widget efficiency.
Got
Now
it.
we're talking
I
about
see.
how the system operates.
Okay.
Right?
Okay,
I mean, so
I follow you.
so you've got a widget, and you can say, I can make this widget more efficient, which is we've done with lighting and we've done with HVAC units. We ramp up the efficiencies and the efficacy and all that kind of stuff. But we don't work about how it works as an entire system. They work together, right? And all that, and that's where we're gonna have to move as we move forward, is the whole building's gotta work together. And
Understand that.
I think that the utilities are hoping and counting on the lighting being the backbone of that building operating, working together. How we can use the lighting systems, the controls, the sensors to make the building operate more efficient.
And when we talk about that whole building, you've not mentioned the word EV chargers. And you've got to include EV
Yeah, we do.
chargers. And we had a discussion out here a little bit earlier today about EV chargers. Where is the energy going to come? Where is the electricity going to come when we all are driving EVs?
I think that's still a question mark. I don't totally know that we know, but I do know that the only way that we're going to make it without having to add a ton of production onto the grid is by conservation. We're gonna have to do that whole building reduction, right? So if we can make these buildings operate as efficient as possible throughout, so the HVAC, the hot water, the lighting, all that stuff works together and becomes the most efficient, we might be able to build up enough conservation work that we don't have to add a ton of new supply to cover these EV. I've heard many different numbers that are out there. Mark Lean's one was that he saw from NREL by 2050 that the EVs will use more electricity than all the commercial buildings combined. Well, that's a big load, and that's a scary load if you're in the utility business of supplying it. So, we've gone for many years, especially in the Northwest, without our new power supply has been conservation. That's our goal.
So you haven't really added.
We don't add a power plant. It's been a long time since we've added a power plant. We've been able to.
Is hydro where you get most of your
Yeah,
power?
for the most part. We're hydro, so it's technically, I guess, a renewable energy,
Sure.
but it's not a renewable energy in the fact that we get more and more restrictions every year for how much water and lack of water and salmon runs and all that kind of stuff. But it's the majority of the power in the Northwest, so we're lucky in that way.
Sure. Does drought affect that?
Obviously, yeah, and the amount of water that they're allowed to run actually through the turbines, right? So when the fish runs for salmon runs to go back up for breeding, when how much water they can run through the turbines at any point in time, and that kind of stuff, all has an effect on how much actual power is there. And even though hydro is the big producer in the Northwest, we still have natural gas-fired plants. We still have wind and solar, and we're adding all those.
Some coal? Do you have some coal?
Very little, but a little. It depends on the utility, and it's in a mix, but it's a pretty small number if we're getting it.
I drive a hybrid, and so I plug in every morning, and that electric power for me, every bit of it's coming from coal. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I'm doing any good or not.
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see with EVs because the power. If we can't do it with conservation, they're going to have to add production. But the bigger problem is not the adding and the production. It's actually the grid isn't capable of handling
Even if you
that
had the
much.
production?
Even if I had the production, the wires to get from
now
production to your cars
okay.
is an issue.
So we've got to get it to conservation. Do you see any lighting technologies out there coming that are going to do this, other than your whole building savings?
I think that for me, the big thing we're focusing on at NIA is luminaire level lighting controls. So integrated sensors in the fixtures and controls, right? So we're really focusing on the
Do you have an idea of in your market area what % of the commercial lighting has controls? Do you have a feel for that at all?
Yeah, so we did a study Bonneville Power did a study a few years back, and they said in the Northwest that the 5% of the buildings had controls.
Wow.
Beyond a wall switch.
Okay, right.
And that, obviously code says you have to have controls, but these are all older buildings.
Right.
Newer
So
buildings do
5%.
it, but 5% was the number.
Okay.
Have anything beyond a wall switch. Right?
So there's plenty of room for
there's
improvement
There's
there.
a lot of room for improvement. I think the big thing is getting people to understand that today's controls are not the same controls that were 20 years ago, and they work. And
Right. They work.
They work. And if you do the right controls that have flexibility, then you don't run into the same problem you had where one person hates it and the other person's okay with it, and the one person that hates it goes finds some duct tape and puts over the sensor so it doesn't work. That's one of the things we tout with the luminaire level, the integrated sensors, is you've got the ability to go all the way to each fixture to be to have the ability to control that fixture in the way that's right for that space. It's not individual controls, right? You're not giving the person the control of the fixture, but you're controlling down to the individual fixture. And so you can have zones as big or small as you want. You can have a single light in a zone, or you could have 8 lights in a zone.
Or you can have 50 lights in a zone.
But you allow it to be so customizable and in a simple way with your phone or an app or that kind of stuff that you take away the issue of the system not working correctly.
Well, simplicity, I think, has been a real barrier.
Yeah.
And I do think the industry has worked very hard to make them simple now. So.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Chris, thank you.
Yes,
I
thank you
appreciate
for
it.
taking the time.